Hello and welcome to the Cook Memorial Public Library podcast. I'm your host, Nate Goss. Today, we are excited to share our interview with Juliet McDaniel, author of the very clever and very funny debut novel, Mr. and Mrs. American Pie. Booklist Star Review wrote that Mr. and Mrs. American Pie is, quote, the perfect blend of salty and sweet, combining 1970s culinary horrors like ham and banana hollandaise with a motley crew of fakers learning what family really means. And actress Laura Dern called Mr. and Mrs. American Pie, quote, delicious storytelling that explores how an unorthodox family brings social equality in the most unlikely and hilarious way. You'll find out later on in our interview why Dern is commenting about this book. This episode was recorded in late September when McDaniel came to Cook Library for an Authors Out Loud event. She was interviewed by Popular Services staff member Erica O'Rourke, and in the interview they'll get a lot more into detail about what the book is about and the process of writing it. Enjoy.
Hi, this is Erica O'Rourke, and you are listening to Cook Memorial Public Library District's podcast, and I am here today with Juliet McDaniel. Juliet McDaniel is a writer of Funny Things. The historical comedy Mr. and Mrs. American Pie is her first novel. Prior to that, she wrote the screenplay to indie rom-com Cordy. Minnesota-born, Arizona-raised, Chicago-educated, Juliet now lives in a location TBD with her 2 cats and 1 excellent partner. Thank you so much for coming to the show.
Thank you for having me.
We'll start off with a softball. Can you tell us a little bit about the book?
Mr. and Mrs. American Pie is set in 1969, and it's about a woman named Maxine who is a Palm Springs socialite until one Thanksgiving where her entire life, to be polite, it just goes straight to hell. Her husband announces he's leaving her, and she has a catastrophic meltdown on that Thanksgiving in front of the creme de la creme of Palm Springs society, is exiled from town and has to start her life over again in a rather dumpy part of Scottsdale, Arizona. So she does the only logical thing a person can do when they have nothing. She decides to enter a beauty pageant for housewives. And since she doesn't really have a husband or children, she gets herself some and goes on to enter this pageant and try to prove to everyone that she is the best wife and mother in all of the land.
And hijinks ensue.
Lots of them, yes.
So I've read the book, and I found it riotously funny, and at the same time, it had a surprising amount of heart. Maxine, if there is a line, she is always perfectly happy to long jump beyond it.
Yes, I like that. Thank you.
And yet, you cannot help but feel for her from the very beginning, and not for the reasons that you'd think. It's not just because her husband left her. There's some really profound sadness underneath.
Yeah, she's someone who is always hiding behind a persona that she's created, and she's all about self-invention. And I think my whole plan was, as the story goes on, to kind of carve away a little of that. So, you want your character to grow and change. And for Maxine, that had to be finding out who she really is and not this larger-than-life, tough-as-nails persona that she wanted to present to the world and rarely succeeded at actually presenting anyway. So,
there is that.
Yeah.
She definitely presents something to the world.
Yeah.
She presents a lot of things. So I have to ask then, where did she come from? Like, she's so much a force of nature.
Yeah, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately because this is a question I get where she comes from. And my usual answer is that she is this imaginary friend in my head whom I pretend to be whenever I've been in a rough situation where I've been uncomfortable. I'm just like, okay. And I never had a name for her until I started writing the book, but I'd just be like, okay, just get out there and be as gutsy and nervy as you want to be and just wing it and you'll be okay. And I think she's a little bit of Dorothy Parker. And then she's a little bit of, there was this book I read when I was way too young to be reading it. I think it came out in 1986, so I would have been 13 years old. It was written by the woman who wrote the Beverly Hills Diet. It was, and I don't remember her name, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
She's passed on, but she wrote a book called Beverly Hills Style, which was horrible. It was the most 80s book. It was a handbook for rich women in the 80s. And it was a lot of it. I remember the part that really stuck with me was, if you don't get decent service at a restaurant, pitch a fit and you will get the best service anywhere. And it was all about one page after another of how to pitch a fit in various public places to get your way, and just act like you deserve everything in the world and you'll get it. And I remember reading this as a kid thinking, this is nuts. I'm 13 and I know I can't act this way, but wow, I kind of want to. So I think part of that has really stuck with me. And I ended up finding the book online as a PDF or something. It's out of print now. And I'm like, yeah, this would be the origins of Maxine.
There you go. That was like her textbook.
Yeah.
I, growing up, had a guide to being a teenage girl from Tina Yothers, who was the youngest sister on Family Ties.
Family Ties, yeah.
But it seems
probably
like this was
is more
Maxine's
solid role model than the one that I chose for myself.
But clearly, the Beverly Hills Guide was Maxine's.
Yeah, and that Maxine would have. Her motto definitely would be "fake it till you make it." That works in her world in Palm Springs, but as she gets into more of the real world with a husband and kids, it doesn't work.
Right. How much research did you do into how beauty pageants, and particularly pageants at that time, how they operated?
That was part of my fascination with beauty pageants is because my grandmother was Mrs. Minnesota, 1957. Mrs. Minnesota, so housewife and mother. And she had 6 children. I think she was 28 then, and she had 6 kids. 2 of them were twins. But yeah, she had a lot of kids, and she had one more after that. So she was the last person on earth you would ever think would be a beauty queen. And she passed away when I was 9, so I didn't have much time with her. But I remember when I was a kid hearing that she was a beauty queen, and all I see is this, I see the Miss America pageant with baton twirling and, I want world peace and stuff. And she's like, yeah, it wasn't that far off. And on her 50th birthday, one of her kids had found a reel from the Mrs. America pageant, and we watched it. And it was her in a little cabin having to keep house for a week and having to always look gorgeous. And the judges would come by on golf carts and judge her cakes and judge her sewing and judge if my grandfather was happy with how she was keeping the house for him.
That's amazing.
And it was, this is like 1982 and I'm 9 years old. And I'm like, this is insane.
Yes.
So I used that as my jumping off point and started researching it and found out, they did those pageants. They still run today. They have a hard time getting all 50 states to participate. And it's a little bit different. They don't put you up in a cabin anymore. They quit doing that in the 80s when they ran out of money. But it's still, you're very much judged on how well you keep within the budget that is set. Now it's how much you and your husband decide on the budget. And I guess you don't even have to have kids. The current Mrs. America is a dog mom. So that works for her.
Now, do you think it was as catty as...
Yes.
as portrayed in the book?
She still had a couple of grudges against a couple of the women who were they were just terrible, but she still had really, longtime friends who were in the pageant as well.
Which states did she hate?
I'm not going to mention one of the states.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
But it's there's a story there. Let's just say there was a lady from Gray's Lake that Grandma didn't care for.
Oh, no. So you have Maxine. She can be a bit of a challenge. You also have some truly horrible people. And I did watch your movie QWERTY as well, that you were the screenwriter for. And you also have some really awful people there, too.
I love awful people.
What's your secret to writing them?
I think it's just getting people to this level where they're just right at that line of almost being a caricature, but there's still something about them. And I'm one of those people who have always listened in on conversations my whole life, listening to snippets of people out of context where you really get some harsher emotion coming through in places. And I just think, some people are so much fun to hate. It also might be because I watched so much, again, back to the 80s, I watched so much TV in the 80s where there were so many fantastic villains. And
oh, yes.
Yeah, Alexis Carrington throwing somebody in the pool, that was awesome.
There's a lot of hair pulling.
Yeah, and I grew up on, some woman storming in a room and throwing a drink in a guy's face. That's funny to me. It's fun, it's funny, it's just a little bit bigger than real life, but it's still enjoyable to watch. So I kind of like awful people.
So You also tell the story from the perspective of Robert, who owns a bar.
Yes.
That Maxine drowns her sorrows at.
Yep.
And then you also write from the perspective of Chuck.
I love Chuck.
I really love Chuck. Oh, my goodness. Kids are very tricky to write because you don't want them to come off as too precious.
Yes.
Did you have any...
Chuck was actually, once I got going and got his mindset and just spent a few days, they say that 80% of writing is thinking about writing, and with Chuck it was more like 90% of it was thinking about it. And I would only write him during the course of a day. I wouldn't try to write from anybody else's perspective because it really took me a lot of time to get into Chuck and then get out of Chuck. The first draft through, one of my editors put in a note that just said Jerry Maguire! ! I'm like, yes, that was too much of the kid from Jerry Maguire in that line of dialogue. And that was my goal after that, was no Jerry Maguire kid.
Absolutely.
But part of what helped was I just really focused on in the world around him, what the pop culture stuff would have been, and trying to think about what my son was into when he was that age. One of the things my publisher suggested is put together a playlist of everything Chuck would be listening to in 1969, 1970. And that was great until like the 80th time you hear, Sugar Sugar by the Archies and you're ready to kill yourself. But once I got into it, he was my easiest character to write.
In writing, there is that idea that you need to kill your darlings.
Oh, yeah. You do. You really do.
You absolutely do.
Oh, yeah.
But were there darlings that you had to kill? And if you're not a writer, what that means is to tell a stronger story, sometimes an author has to cut parts of the story that they really love and feel fantastic about.
Yes, I did. I went, once I started writing from different perspectives, I went nuts with that. And the second full draft of the book was almost 500 pages. And you were getting...
It's not 500 pages now. She killed a lot of darlings.
I killed a lot of darlings.
It was a bloodbath.
Just slaughtered them all. Because once I I knew I wanted those core three. But then the only one I missed was that Maisie had a bigger role. And I love her.
She's fantastic.
And I there was just no way to do her character justice and give her own voice. She was just too separate from the family. Mm-hmm. But we had all of Maisie's backstory in how she got pulled into the pageant, her entire life in Chicago with her husband and her kids. And I love her. I loved her. But I could have, that was like that was easily 150 pages of Maisie before she even got to the pageant. And it was too much. I would love to find some way at some point in the future to either use that or do something with Maisie because I loved her.
She was a great character.
Thank you. I loved her.
You did weave in a lot of Libertyville, too.
That was something I really, really wanted to do. Yeah, because the
Liberty Theater.
Yes.
And one of its most famous myths.
Yes.
Stories,
Marlon
I should
Brando.
say.
That's one of my favorite things. Well, I raised my son in Vernon Hills and Mundelein and a little bit here in Libertyville. And this is the library where he would do his summer reading every year.
Yay,
and I love it here. And three of my really good friends grew up around here, and two of them in particular, David Whelan and George Green, grew up here. And I've heard their stories about Libertyville. I've heard so many of the amazing stories about, when John F. Kennedy visited, and then, of course, the Brando stories, just legendary in town.
They're thick on the ground.
Oh, yes. And everybody has a little variation on it, and I love it. Yeah. So I knew I wanted Robert to be a good Midwesterner, and I thought, I'm going to have him be from Libertyville. Why not? I really liked having Libertyville in here.
So now you have written both for film and television and novels. What's the difference when you're is there a difference in your process? How does it?
Yes, that was. I have a master's in writing from DePaul, and in grad school, my focus was on teaching writing and on writing for screen. So basically, I hadn't written any prose since 2000. I had done all screenplays, and with screenplays, the writing is dialogue driven. And you want to, as a good screenwriter, you want to leave room for the actors and the directors to come in and collaborate and add to that. And I learned the hard way that you really need to get inside your characters' heads when you're writing prose. You can't leave any of that open to interpretation. So that was a real challenge for me. It's just a different way of structuring your story in a lot of ways. Not so much the beginning, middle, end structure, but, you know, where do you want the emotion to show? And what device do you use to let the audience know what your character is thinking and feeling? And the difficult part for me was Maxine is always thinking one thing and saying and acting in another way, especially in the beginning. So always when I came to adapting it into a screenplay into the TV pilot, it was really tricky of how do I have her saying one thing while she's clearly thinking and feeling another, and what do I do to show that?
It's a good challenge. And we should probably say here that, you know, the reason that you're the poor sap who has to adapt this is because, in fact, the book was optioned.
It was.
And do
you
want to talk a little bit about
that? Once I was done with the book, I had a literary agent and I have a publisher, and they worked together and got the book out, and we went out to shop it, and initially the thought was I just want to sell it to somebody who will write it and turn it into a movie, even though I'd always thought it felt more like a limited TV series, like 8 or 10 episodes. And over the course of a month, it went from I'm just going to sell it and it's going to become a movie to Laura Dern, the actress Laura Dern, her brand new production company joined forces with another production company who's done a lot of great stuff. The two women who run Platform One, they were behind Arrested Development, Narcos, F is for Family, and Hannibal. So they've done a lot of stuff, very different. All over the map.
Variety.
Oh, these women, Katie O'Connell and Elisa Ellis, they're amazing. They have just it's ridiculous the stuff they've done. And they offered me a chance to turn it into a TV series, and then said, well, why don't you write it and, write the pilot for us? And okay.
I will be that poor sap.
I can do that. And I'm like, writing for television's where I've always wanted to end up. Mm-hmm. I just didn't think I was going to get there yet, but I did. So it doesn't have a network home yet. That's still coming up. The pilot was just finished yesterday.
Oh, wow.
So next comes the pitching it to networks and shopping it around, and hopefully it'll be on a small screen soon.
Oh, it would be so fantastic. I cannot wait to see it.
I'm very excited. I get to stay on the project. I'm an executive producer, and I will, depending on the situation, might be writing other episodes too. So I'm really, really excited for this to see where this goes.
Why don't we move on to the closing bit, which is what are you reading and watching right now?
Oh, I love this
what
question.
Do you love?
I love it. There is a TV show on. I don't think enough people are watching it. It's on AMC on Monday nights right after Better Call Saul. It's called Lodge 49. It is so much fun. It is sort of like it's a sunshine noir. So it's set in California, and it's this really kind of trippy hippie story, but it's nuts. And every character in it is just delightful. Over the top, funny, sweet. It's kind of this slow burn, but you just want to spend more time with these people. It's about the surfer bum who kind of loses his way in life, and his car breaks down in front of this mysterious lodge. Over the course of the series, all this little magical realism starts sneaking in, and it's so much fun. And then if you like something set in the 70s, as far as a period piece goes, I love The Deuce on HBO. It's not for everybody because it's very adult material, but It's so good. New York in the mid-70s, just as grimy, gritty. I love it. For books, full disclosure, she is also a writer with my publisher, Inkshares, but Jackie Castle, she has this fantastic sci-fi dystopian novel called The Seclusion that feels just like a little bit further into our future, and it's really disturbing, and it's really gripping, and if you like The Handmaid's Tale turned up to about 11, this is it, and it's great. It's so well written, but it's really one of those, you just sit down and you just get sucked in. And then I've been reading Eve Babbitt's lately, and she's really breezy. You can pick her up. She's got a great book of short stories and essays kind of thrown together called Eve's Hollywood. She was a muse to so many different rock stars and painters and kind of the original groupie, but so smart. And so her stuff's fun.
And then I almost forgot to ask, and feel free not to answer. But what's next for you, other than television writing?
I have a couple other book ideas, but one that I am hoping to get started on next. I can't say, I'm not going to say it. I haven't even told my publisher much about it yet, but it's 9 to 5 meets Rosemary's Baby, but sort of based on a true story. So
that is quite the elevator pitch.
And I have it all outlined out, and I've just got maybe the first 2 chapters in, so we'll see how long it takes me to get that turned around.
Well, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Juliet McDaniel, thank you guys for listening.
All right, that's it for our show. Big thanks again to Juliet McDaniel and to Erica for such a fun and enjoyable conversation. We do have Mr. and Mrs. American Pie at the library, and you can find it by either visiting our website at cooklib.org and searching the catalog, or just click the link in our show notes. A few more things before we go. Our blog, Shelf Life, it's a really great place to catch up with what we're reading right now and also find all sorts of stuff about local history in Libertyville, genealogy tips, and a whole lot more. That blog can be found at shelflife.cooklib.org. Please, if you ever want to talk to us, you can reach out to us anytime. Talk to us on Twitter, @CookLibrary is our handle, or you can always send us an email. Send those messages to webmaster@cooklib.org. If you like this episode, spread the word by sharing it with others and letting them know that they can catch future episodes by subscribing in Apple Podcasts or anywhere they like to get their podcasts. We'll be back soon, but until then, keep reading, keep watching, and keep listening.